My favorite sleep improvement device just got a major update. H-Sleep just launched their new H-Sleep Pod 5 Ultra, and this time it's not just the surface of the mattress that is cooled or heated, but now the blanket itself is also integrated into the system and completely temperature controlled. And as always, this is done separately for each side of the bed, so if your partner sleeps much warmer or cooler than you, each of you can set your own temperature. Now, in addition, you also get some of the best sleep stage tracking out there, as you'll see in a moment in my scientific testing. But first, some important background. There are actually 3 different versions of the Pod 5 available. There's the normal Pod 5, which doesn't have the cooling blanket. Now, if you get the Pod 5 with the additional blanket, then it's called the Pod 5 Plus. And the third version is the most expensive. This is the Pod 5 Ultra, which in addition to the blanket also has the height adjustable base, like the one I have right here. This base is supposed to help with snoring and also has built-in speakers that can play soundscapes or meditation guidance by Andrew Huberman. In this video, we will scientifically test each of the features of the new Pod 5 and systematically check if their features are as good as H-Sleep claims they are. For those of you that are new to the channel, my name is Rob and I'm a postdoctoral scientist specializing in biological data analysis. This is actually one of the most extensive tests I've done in a while. For this test, I've actually bought a thermal camera, so you can see me in that camera right now, 5 temperature loggers, 2 power loggers to see how much electricity my pod uses, and of course we'll be using my trusty ECG and EEG brainwave sensors to scientifically test as many features of the Pod 5 Ultra as we can. Now, this video also hopefully sees the return of Mega Snorer Frenchie. That is, if it fits the schedule, and we're not sure yet. And we will see if the snoring intervention of the Pod 5 Ultra is able to fight and detect his snoring. Now, to reduce your snoring, the Pod 5 Ultra, like the Pod 4 Ultra, will slightly elevate the position of your head when you start snoring, which has been found to reduce snoring and can be used as one way to lessen the negative effects of sleep apnea. But let's first talk about what the H-Sleep Pod 5 can do and what the differences are between the new Pod 5 and the previous Pod 4. The main change that Pod 5 introduces is of course that a temperature regulated blanket like this one can now be attached directly to the Pod 5, which has the same cooling and heating functionalities as the Pod's mattress surface. The temperature of the blanket is actually the same as the temperature of the mattress surface. This way you have a 360-degree temperature coverage, so you get a uniform temperature all around your body, which in effect doubles the heating and cooling efficiency. The Pod 5 Ultra also has built-in speakers within the adjustable base, offering customizable soundscapes, guided meditation and audio alarms. And finally, the Pod 5 Ultra features new physical tap-to-control buttons directly on the mattress cover for quick temperature changes and other functions. Previously, we had a single tap surface, which you controlled by using different numbers of taps for different commands. But now there are actually 3 buttons on each side. One for raising the temperature, one for lowering it, and at the center is a customizable button that can be used for the alarm, adjusting elevation of the bed and audio control. But why do we actually want this kind of heating and cooling functionalities of our bed? Well, to explain that, let's illustrate the principle behind the H-Sleep Pod with some actual measurements and data. And for this, I'll give the floor to past Rob, who comes to you from a day before his Pod 4 was switched to a Pod 5. But before moving on, I should mention there's an affiliate link to the H-Sleep Pod 5 in the description below and up here, which will give you the best discount possible when combined with my code TQS, and it also supports the channel at the same time. However, my opinions are completely my own. H-Sleep didn't even get to see this video before release and they had no influence on it. But let's get back to past Rob and look at that data. Hi there, past Rob here. So tomorrow I'm gonna say goodbye to my H-Sleep Pod 4. I've used it for about a year now. I'm really happy with it, but I'm also really excited to test out the H-Sleep Pod 5. But before saying goodbye to it tomorrow, I wanted to look at a few things. And the one thing I was specifically interested in is seeing how the cooling functionality actually matched my core body temperature. So I measured my core body temperature during the night with these 2 core sensors. I made a recent video about it and showed that it was pretty accurate at tracking my temperature during the night. And I wanted to compare how that matched the temperature of the bed. So I had a couple of temperature sensors right here. Let's have a look. So I taped them to the bed and I have a few replicas right here in different positions because I wanted to make sure they weren't influenced by my body temperature. So I'm gonna check all of these and see, well, there's actually also one right here, and see which of these best represents the temperature of the bed, and then see if we see a nice association between the temperature of the bed and my core body temperature, because that's of course the idea behind the cooling functionality of the H-Sleep Pod. The temperature of the H-Sleep Pod changes during the night and it nicely matches your core body temperature, or at least that's the sales pitch that they give. And I'm really interested to see, do we see that nice correlation between the pod temperature and my core body temperature? And do we see any changes when we now look at the Pod 5 later on? I don't expect major differences, honestly. It might actually be that the Pod 5 shows more efficient cooling because it cools both the bed surface and the blanket on top, but that's a bit difficult for me to test. In general, I'm just curious if the curves nicely match for both the Pod 4 and the Pod 5. So let's have a look at the results for the Pod 4 first, and then future Rob will talk about the Pod 5.
I have 2 nights with complete data for the Pod 4. We'll look at Pod 5 in a second, but you can see 4 different temperatures in this overview right here. On the left, we have the temperature of the bed measured in 2 different ways. And on the right, my core body temperature, which is this sort of blue line, and my skin temperature, which is honestly less important in purple right here. But let's look at the left graph right here first. So this is the temperature over time of the bed, measured in red by the H-Sleep cover and measured in green by the external sensor. I used one of the sensors at my foot because this wasn't influenced by my body heat. I actually realized later this wasn't on top of the heating element of the H-Sleep pod. So it was a bit cooler than the H-Sleep mattress, but overall you can see both methods measure the exact same temperature patterns. Then when I was actually done reading and all those things and ready to sleep, the H-Sleep pod cooled down the temperature to its lowest temperature somewhere 1/3 into the night. And then slowly, as I was getting closer to waking up, the H-Sleep pod increased the temperature again. So this is the temperature of the surface of the bed. If we look at my core body temperature as measured by the core sensor in blue-green right here, we can see I had a high initial temperature. Then as I fell asleep and got more into deep sleep, my core body temperature plummeted and it actually stayed relatively stable, only increasing a little bit here near the end of the night. So this is more or less what I want to see. I do sometimes see more of an increase later in the night, but this is mostly a typical pattern for me. Let's take a look at a second night. So here we have a second night example with again the temperature of the bed on the left and my core body temperature on the right. And if you didn't notice, degrees Celsius is on the left in both graphs and degrees Fahrenheit is on the right for those who don't understand the better temperature unit. Anyhow, let's take a look at those patterns again. So we see a slight increase just before going to bed in the bed temperature, then a decrease, so the H-Sleep pod cooled down, and then later also as sort of an alarm, I had the bed heat up a lot so I would wake up. And you can see somewhat logical temperature patterns in my core temperature. So we see a quick decrease as I fell asleep, but then a few moments of increasing temperature. And I'm not sure if I actually had a poor night's sleep this night or what caused that, but this is actually quite interesting. And then later in the night, it was a bit lower again, and then closer to waking up, it increased again, together with the bed temperature increasing as well. So this is sort of the general idea behind the H-Sleep pod. And you can see it a bit better in this first graph. So it decreases the temperature early on in the night and then later increases it. And that sort of matched my core body temperature. But later on, I'll give the word to Future Rob and we'll see a few more nights with the H-Sleep Pod 5. Hi, Future Rob here. I've now had the Pod 5 for close to 2 weeks. So let's see if we get the same results as we did for the Pod 4. I can already say that at least subjectively, it does feel like I get a more even cooling and heating effect on the Pod 5 versus the Pod 4. Of course, the total amount of cooling and heating is also larger because your body has contact with 2 surfaces on each side, so on the top and on the bottom. So if you're switching from the Pod 4 to the Pod 5, the temperature settings in the app will actually change automatically to be a bit less extreme to account for that increased heat transfer. But of course you can change this back in the app if you want. But let's get to the results of the Pod 5. And I'll show you 2 example nights with the Pod 5, which actually look mostly similar to the Pod 4. So again, on the left, we have the temperature of the bed measured in 2 different ways. And on the right, we have my core body temperature and my skin temperature. But we're mostly going to ignore the skin temperature for now. So again, on the left, we see the expected variation in temperature of the bed. So a high temperature as I get into bed, then the H-Sleep Pod 5 cools me down, and then later in the night as I get closer to waking up, it heats the bed up so I more naturally wake up, or at least that's the idea behind the H-Sleep Pod. And then indeed we see my core body temperature really plummets as I get into bed, then has a few variations and is slightly higher closer to waking up, though again I don't have that clear spike of increased core body temperature for this night. And for this second night right here we see more or less the same thing, So interestingly, the external sensor and the H-Sleep pod show a bit of deviation in the beginning. I think I might have actually removed the temperature from the bed a bit to extract the data, and then a little bit before midnight put it back on. So that could explain why there's that deviation. But in general, again, we see a cooling temperature as I get into bed, and then as the night progresses, a slow increase in temperature again. And on the right, we see something quite interesting. I think I had a bit of a poor night's sleep here in the beginning, but I'm not 100% sure. So we see a clear decrease in core body temperature as I fell asleep, but then this variation in core body temperature here in the beginning of the night. And then later in the night, it stabilized at a lower temperature. And then as I was getting closer to waking up and the H-Sleep pod warmed me up, also my core body temperature increased. Now, I'm not saying my core body temperature increased because of the H-Sleep pod. It could have helped, we're not sure. I would have to do long-term experiments where I do and do not let myself be heated up by the H-Sleep pod. But in these examples, so this one for instance, but also this one, we do see that very roughly at least the general patterns of a very quickly decreasing temperature in the beginning of the night, and to some degree at least increasing temperature later in the night matches between what the H-Sleep actively tries to do and what my core body temperature actually does. Though again, I'm not saying the H-Sleep pod causes these temperature shifts, I'm just saying they're trying to match those shifts and potentially make them a bit better. The idea behind the H-Sleep pod is that it can modulate the temperature of your sleeping environment as the night progresses, with more cooling early on and a higher temperature later in the night, which in the end leads to better sleep, or at least that's the aim. It basically tries to reinforce your natural core body temperature fluctuations, and the hope is that it reinforces your sleep quality. We can indeed see that the temperature of the pod mostly nicely fluctuates in tandem with your core body temperature, though of course it isn't perfect. But is there any science that supports this idea behind the H-Sleep pod 5? Well, there is some evidence, I would say, though also not a ton. First of all, it has been shown that typically your core body temperature often follows this kind of hammock shape, with a decrease in the first part of your night and an increase closer to waking up. As you can see in this graph right here, for instance, which is an example from a scientific publication. Also, there is some evidence that actively cooling your core body temperature before sleep onset reduces the time you need to fall asleep. Somewhat counterintuitively, this is often done by, for instance, having a hot shower before bed or by using a warm mug on the hands or feet. Though these methods either heat temporarily or locally, in the end it actually leads to a lower core body temperature because the body tries to dump a lot of heat through your skin in response to that heating you've done. There's also some evidence that gradually warming in the second half of the sleeping period could assist in waking up and having improved feelings of refreshment upon awakening, though the evidence here is potentially even less clear. So those things are studied in multiple studies to some degree. However, I couldn't find many studies that showed the effect of a temperature-controlled mattress or blanket. There was one study from the University of Texas at Austin where they showed some positive effects of another kind of temperature-controlled mattress, but this mattress was actually not uniformly warm, but had a different temperature at the center of the body versus at the arms and legs, so different from how the H-Sleep mattress works, and it was only studied in 11 men. There's also a study which was done by H-Sleep themselves, which was well written and the results look good, but when a company does their own studies, I'm always a bit wary about trusting all the results. So there is some scientific evidence to support the notion that actively cooling and heating you in different sleep phases might work, but it's still very preliminary. However, I personally mainly like the H-Sleep pod for two things. First of all, the measurements of the sleep stages, heart rate variability, and all the other metrics are very accurate. And second, what I like the pod 5 most for is that it allows me to sleep at a temperature I am comfortable with. I'm easily way too warm in bed, and the H-Sleep pod has been a godsend for this. I've been using the H-Sleep mattress ever since generation 2, and we're now at generation 5, and they've continued to get incrementally better. Especially in summer, I really suffer without the pod, and me and my ex-girlfriend would actually sleep many nights at my place in summer because I was the only one of us that owned an H-Sleep pod. I expect this cooling functionality will be even better now that the blanket also cools, since even though the surface of the bed was already cool, I would still sometimes be a bit too warm to sleep without a blanket in summer because my body just has real trouble cooling down. However, as I said, also in terms of objective measurements, the H-Sleep pod has been great in my testing. The H-Sleep pod will track your sleep stages, heart rate variability or HRV, snoring and breathing rate, all without having to wear anything on your body. And in the past with the pod 3 and pod 4, this has been super accurate. And given that the pod 5 has the exact same sensor set and design as the pod 4, it should be just as good, though the addition of a cooling blanket could potentially have some unexpected effects on the pod's performance. I don't expect it, but of course we'll put all of that to the test in today's video. Let's start by testing the sleep stage tracking performance. As always, we'll test that by comparing the sleep stage tracking performance of the Pod 5 Ultra to the Z-Max EEG device, which was specifically designed for sleep stage tracking and can even measure your brain waves. Now, the Z-Max EEG device also has its limitations, especially when it comes to detecting awake time, but it will give us a general impression of the pod's performance. We will just ignore this awake column right here, because the Z-Max tends to detect a lot of these short awake moments that aren't really awake moments. Now, today I want to show you two things. First of all, how well does the Pod 5 perform? But I also want to share my long-term testing of the Pod 4. I think I have about 74 nights of data with the Pod 4 that I analyzed both the Z-Max data and the Pod 4 for this year, 2025. Now, the reason I'll do both is because I have a ton of data for the Pod 4, so 74 nights, much more than for the Pod 5. And since both have the same sensor set, they will likely at least perform similarly, but I want to do both tests, one with the actual device but with a limited amount of data, and one with the Pod 4 with much more data. However, let's start with the results for the actual Pod 5, which you can see the results right here. So this right here is an overview for a total of 6 nights that I tested the Pod 5, so a relatively limited set of data. And on top are the sleep stages as recorded by the Z-Max EEG device, and on the left are the sleep stages as recorded by the Pod 5. And each column right here sums to 100%, meaning that we can see what percentage of each of the sleep stages according to the Z-Max was predicted as a sleep stage by the Pod 5. And if they would perfectly agree, all values on the diagonal should be 100%. Now, first of all, we see that about 82% of what was deep sleep according to the Z-Max was also deep sleep according to the Pod 5 Ultra, which is really good, honestly. This is one of the higher percentages I've seen for any device out there. And if there was any confusion, this was mostly with light sleep at about 17%. Light sleep agreement was also very good at about 78%, and most confusion was with either deep sleep or REM sleep. REM sleep agreement is surprisingly good at about 86%, so REM sleep is generally one of the harder sleep stages for a device to track, but the Pod 5 Ultra does amazing for this at about 86%, and any confusion in this case was with light sleep right here. As I said, we won't be focusing on awake time, but just for completeness, about 26% of what the Z-Max said was awake time was also awake time according to the Pod 5 Ultra, but like I said, the Z-Max detects way too much awake time, a lot of these really short awake moments. So we're only going to focus on deep, light and REM sleep. And based on that, the H-Sleep Pod 5 Ultra seems to be amazing. It's really one of the better devices out there. But let's now take a look at the results for the H-Sleep Pod 4, for which I have many more nights of data, and it has the same sensor suite and software, so it should perform similarly, and it will probably give us a better impression of the long-term performance of the Pod 5, but I want to give you both data sets. And here we have the results for the Pod 4 Ultra. Let's first look at deep sleep. Deep sleep agreement is again very good at 78%, a little bit lower than what we just saw for the Pod 5, but that's probably random variation. And again, most confusion is with light sleep. Light sleep agreement is again very good, very similar also at 79%. And again, also most confusion is with either deep sleep or REM sleep. And also REM sleep detection is again very good, though in this case about the same as deep sleep and light sleep agreement at about 79%. So these are all very similar, so all sleep stages are performing about the same. And for REM sleep, most confusion is again with light sleep. So these results look very similar for the Pod 4 and the Pod 5, and I really think they just perform the same. Also, again for completeness, the agreement of awake time is about 34%. But this really shows that the H-Sleep Pod is a good sleep stage tracker. It is very consistent over all sleep stages, having a good agreement. But let's take a look at some of the individual nights, and for that we'll look at the Pod 5, since that's the actual device you're interested in, so you can better understand how well the patterns agree between the Z-Max and the Pod 5. As I said, looking at the individual nights will help us understand those patterns even better, and here we see the first night I wanted to share with you. On top, we have the sleep stages according to the Z-Max EEG headband, with along the horizontal axis the clock time and my sleep stages on the vertical axis. And on the bottom, we have a similar plot, but now for the Pod 5. And in purple now right here, I highlighted the deep sleep as recorded by the EEG device. And as you can see on the bottom, the deep sleep as detected by the Pod 5 agrees very well with the EEG device. It's not perfect, but most of the deep sleep detected by the EEG device is also detected by the Pod 5, and no extra deep sleep is detected. And that's more or less also what we see for the second night, though a little bit of extra deep sleep was detected right here in this last segment, but overall showing a very good agreement. And we can actually do the same thing for REM sleep, which is marked in red right here. And as you can see, the REM sleep detected by the EEG device in red matches very well with the REM sleep detected by the Pod 5. Only here near the end of the night, there's a small segment of REM sleep detected by the EEG device that wasn't detected by the Pod 5, but otherwise basically perfect agreement. And for this second night, we see more or less the same thing. A little bit of deviation right here in this third segment, but overall one of the best performances I've seen. However, we can actually put all these results into the perspective of many other devices I've tested in the past, and you can see that in this overview right here. So this is an overview of the agreement of different watches with different EEG references. Along the horizontal axis, we have the average agreement over the individual sleep stages with the reference device, and on the vertical axis, we have the agreement of the worst sleep stage. Basically, that means the better the agreement of the device with the reference device, the more to the top right it is. So we want those devices to be as far to the top right as possible. Now, this overview is slightly complicated because we use different reference devices. The devices not marked in any color were tested against the Dream 2 EEG headband, but Dream unfortunately went bankrupt, so I cannot use it anymore. Devices marked in blue-purple were tested against polysomnography, which is the gold standard in sleep stage tracking. And the devices marked in green were tested against the Z-Max EEG headband, the one we used in this video. And you can actually see that all 8 sleep pods are on the top right here. So we have the 8 sleep pod 3, 4, and 5. So these are the new results for the 8 sleep pod 4 in 2025. The recent results also with the 8 sleep pod 5, but only for 6 nights. And here are the older results I have of the 8 sleep pod 3, tested with both the Z-Max EEG headband and the Dream 2 EEG headband. And all results are in this area right here, making them some of the best devices out there. Especially if you look at the prediction of the worst sleep stage. So is it quite bad at one of the sleep stages? No, it's not. It's really good at all of the sleep stages, which is why the 8 sleep pod 4 and 5 are highest here on the vertical axis out of all devices out there. So they're really consistent between all sleep stages in terms of performance. So the best devices out there, at least when tested on me at the moment, are different Apple Watches, the 8 sleep pod, potentially the Oura Ring 3 and 4. Those are really the best performers. There's also the Sleep 2 or Nucoa app, but this is a dedicated separate app with a Polar device. You can also check that out if you want. But that really means that the 8 sleep pod is amongst the top 4 performers out there, and out of all devices, it appears to be the most consistent over all sleep stages. So I can really recommend the 8 sleep pod, at least based on this testing, if you want to track your sleep stages accurately. So in terms of sleep stage tracking, that looks pretty amazing for the pod 5 and also for the pod 4 for that matter. These are really some of the best sleep stage trackers out there, and you don't even have to wear anything at all on your body. However, that's not all the pod 5 can measure. It also measures your heart rate and heart rate variability at night. Now, we all know what heart rate is, but why do we want to measure that at night? Well, there are multiple reasons. First of all, if your heart rate is a lot higher than normal during the night, this could indicate you might be getting sick, so deviations from your normal are one thing to look out for. In addition, I also want to measure my heart rate because I want my heart rate to drop as my night progresses and have its lowest value somewhere in the middle of the night and then rise again as I'm slowly waking up. So my heart rate forms sort of a hammock shape, similar to what we had for the temperature. As you can see right here, for instance, in an example for one night I slept with the pod 5. So this is one example of what I personally ideally would like to see. However, if my heart rate never reaches a clear low point but just keeps dropping and never has a low point until the end of the night, this likely indicated something was off with what I did in the hours before going to bed. For me, this is often the case when I have a larger meal later in the evening, and this often makes me feel much less rested during the day, so this is something I want to be aware of, also to teach me what kind of meal timings work or don't work for me. But can the pod 5 actually measure your heart rate correctly? Let's take a look. But first, if you're finding these videos interesting, it really helps me get access to new devices sooner and helps me reach more people if you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Pressing those 2 buttons really makes a huge difference, and commenting also helps. I would really appreciate it. Of course, using my affiliate link for the 8 sleep pod or anything at all on Amazon for that matter supports this channel, and in the case of 8 sleep gives you the best discount possible. But back to the testing. The way I tested the heart rate tracking performance is by wearing an ECG chest strap at night, which measures the electrical activity of the heart and is the most reliable way of measuring heart rate. Now specifically, I wore the Polar H10 ECG chest strap to bed for several nights, and here you can see those measurements compared to the pod's 5 heart rates for the first night I wanted to share with you. So we have the 8 sleep pod 5 in red and the Polar H10 in blue. So you can see over the night along the horizontal axis the different heart rates, and you can see there's a very good agreement between the 8 sleep and the H10 ECG chest strap. Only right here do we have a disagreement, but I think I actually left the bed for a second, so in those moments the HSleep pod cannot measure my heart rate anymore. And you can see generally a very good agreement otherwise. For this second night we also see very good agreement overall, only right here I left the bed again for a second, so I had a high heart rate as measured by the chest strap because it was still on my body. Of course the HSleep cannot measure my heart rate the moment I'm out of bed, but otherwise very good agreement. Also for this night we have a very good agreement overall, some small deviations. Again, I don't know if I left the bed right here, but generally looking very good. Also this night, generally good agreement. And also right here we have a very good agreement. There was one night, which is this one right here, where we have these weird dips in my heart rate. I think I actually had a problem with the chest strap right there because my heart rate wouldn't suddenly drop below 40 BPM. So we will ignore these measurements right here because I think here the reference was actually wrong. But otherwise, there's generally just a super good agreement between the chest strap and the HSleep pod. So it can definitely measure heart rate quite accurately. But we can actually also look at this in another way by looking at the agreement directly. And the way we're gonna do that is by combining the data of all nights and plotting the correlation between the reference device along the horizontal axis and the HSleep pod 5 along the vertical axis. And if the measurements would perfectly agree, all points should be along this blue line right here. So each dot is a single heart rate measurement matched between the reference device and the HSleep pod. And overall, you can see a super good agreement. There's a few moments where the reference device detected a higher heart rate. So those are the points here below the blue line. This is likely where I left the bed for a few minutes. And we have these 3 points right here, which were those deviating points in the last night. But otherwise we have a super good agreement between both devices. These results show that, at least on me, the heart rate tracking of the HSleep pod 5 is likely pretty accurate. This is definitely good enough for me to get all the insights I need to from my heart rate. So if you don't feel comfortable wearing a smartwatch while sleeping, the HSleep pod is definitely a good alternative. But what about something much harder to measure, heart rate variability, or HRV in short? HRV is the variation in time intervals between consecutive heartbeats, reflecting, for instance, how well your body can adapt to physiological stress and relaxation. Now, unlike heart rate, which only measures beats per minute, HRV analysis requires precise timing of individual heartbeats, making it significantly more sensitive to measurement errors. Accurate HRV measurements thus demand high-quality, consistent signals, often requiring specialized sensors like ECG chest straps, making it a much more challenging metric to reliably track compared to heart rate alone. So let's see if the HSleep pod 5 is able to measure my HRV. As I mentioned, HRV is harder to measure than heart rate because you need the distances between the individual heartbeats instead of just the total number of heartbeats. And here you can see the results for the first night, where we're comparing the results for the HSleep pod to the Polar H10, where I actually used an app called Elite HRV, but that's not the most important part here. I did have to sort of guesstimate how the HRV is actually calculated by the HSleep pod and in what time frames, and this was sort of the best I could come up with. And generally we see a pretty good agreement between the HSleep pod in red and my calculation of the HRV in blue-green. It's not perfect. The HRV according to the HSleep sometimes spikes a bit right here, but overall the general patterns agree almost perfectly. For this second night we see more or less the same thing. Again, a few more spikes in the HSleep data compared to the Polar H10 calculation that I did, but overall super good agreement. Also this third night generally looks very good, a bit of deviation right here, but nothing big I would say. Also right here, pretty good, though generally in the higher range, the HRV according to the HSleep tends to be a bit higher than my calculation. Though again, I had to sort of guesstimate the way it's exactly calculated, in which time frame, how they define certain things. But overall, for all nights, we see pretty good agreement. It's not perfect, but probably good enough. Only for this last night right here, we again have 2 spikes. So those were the same moments we saw before where we had 2 dips in heart rate. So here there was most likely something wrong with the reference device. But again, we can put these results into perspective and actually calculate a correlation. And here again, we have a correlation plot, but now for HRV instead of heart rate, with again the reference device here along the horizontal axis and the HSleep pod along the vertical axis. And mostly again, most points are along the blue line, which is really good. It's definitely not as good as heart rate, and especially here in the higher heart rate range, the HRV according to my calculation is always a bit lower than that of HSleep, but otherwise quite a good agreement. This is good enough for me, and I think good enough to draw any conclusions that are meaningful. we do see that this correlation value is now a bit lower than what we had before for heart rate. So now the correlation is about 0.8, actually 0.79, and not quite as high as we had for heart rate. What was that again? So for heart rate, the correlation was close to 0.9, so about 0.10 lower. Still very good, I would say. There's not any device out there that does significantly better than this. Again, that looks pretty impressive for the HSleep Pod 5. It does appear to be able to meaningfully measure my HRV, though it doesn't perfectly agree with the chest strap. I expect the quality is good enough for me. One benefit the HSleep Pod 5 has over competitors that make, for instance, smartwatches or smart rings is that they're not limited by battery life. So they can continuously measure high resolution signals, giving them a better shot at getting accurate measurements, whereas smartwatches and smart rings often limit themselves to fewer measurements throughout the night just because of battery life. The reason people commonly use HRV measurements is to assess their body's recovery status, stress levels, and overall well-being. By monitoring daily HRV trends, people can spot early signs of illness, optimize exercise load and recovery, enhance sleep quality, and even better manage chronic stress. So if you're interested in collecting this data, the HSleep Pod is definitely a good option. So this was one way of validating it with an ECG chest strap, but another way to confirm this is by comparing the measurements of the HSleep Pod 5 to the Oura Ring, which is very popular amongst the same demographic that would also be interested in the HSleep Pod. In my testing, the Oura Ring has always proven to be a very good heart rate and HRV tracker, so let's see if these agree. Of course, the Oura Ring is not a gold standard, but if the HSleep Pod and the Oura Ring give very similar results, it's likely both of them perform well because they're independent technologies. So we can make similar plots to before, but now instead of the reference device, we can plot the heart rate according to the Oura Ring 4 in blue-green. And if we look at the agreement with the HSleep Pod, that looks really good, at least for heart rate. And again, here we have a moment I likely left the bed, I think, where the Oura Ring was able to detect an increased heart rate, but the HSleep mattress wasn't, which is just a logical conclusion of the way heart rate is measured there. Here we have a second night where we have almost perfect agreement. This third night as well, fourth night, fifth night, sixth night, and seventh night. So overall, basically we get the same heart rate reading at night, whether you use a ring, so a smart ring that is actually on your body, or a mattress cover that you just have to lay on, like in this case, the HSleep Pod 5. And of course, we can do something similar for heart rate variability, and that is displayed right here, with the HRV as measured by the Oura Ring in blue-green, and the HRV as measured by the HSleep Pod 5 in red. And overall, again, a very good agreement, though a bit more spikes by the HSleep Pod. Also right here, there are a few more extreme spikes in the HRV measurements of the HSleep Pod 5. But otherwise, very good agreement. Also for this night, very similar patterns. We get similar results right here, also right here, and basically for all nights. This all appears to be pretty good agreement, but again, we can calculate those correlations as well. So here we have a correlation plot of the heart rate measurements according to the Oura Ring 4 versus the HSleep Pod 5. And as you can see, there's generally a very good agreement. The biggest deviations are usually 2 BPM max, so maybe measuring 46 instead of 44. But overall, just a very good agreement. I think in such a narrow heart rate range, a correlation of 0.96 is just super good. And combined with the results we just saw for the ECG chest strap, this basically guarantees you get good heart rate measurements at night with both the Oura Ring 4 and the HSleep Pod 5. So whichever of these two you get and whatever you feel more comfortable with, you're gonna get good heart rate readings. For HRV, so heart rate variability, we also see a pretty decent correlation, though it's definitely a lot lower now at 0.76. So very similar to the correlation we just saw with the ECG chest strap. And in both cases, when comparing the HSleep Pod 5 with either the ECG chest strap or the Oura Ring, in the higher heart rate range, the HSleep Pod tends to have a bit more of these extreme peaks in there. Now, I'm not sure if this is because of the way they calculate heart rate variability or what the exact cause is, but it does make me think that potentially the Oura Ring 4 is just slightly better at HRV measurements, though this is difficult to say without a more extensive analysis. Overall though, I think that both are good enough at measuring your HRV to make any meaningful conclusions of your nights. So you're probably gonna draw the same conclusions no matter what device you use. So overall, for both heart rate and heart rate variability, I can recommend the Oura Ring 4, but definitely also the HSleep Pod 5. So it's just up to whichever one you prefer. This again suggests that the heart rate and HRV are likely tracked pretty well by the HSleep Pod 5. Now, one more thing it tracks is your breathing rate. And I have to say, I don't really have a good reference for this, but I can get a very rough estimate based on the ECG heartbeat measurements. Because breathing rate can be estimated from the distance between heartbeats by analyzing subtle fluctuations in heart rate patterns known as respiratory sinus arrhythmia. Now, this is not the bad kind of arrhythmia, but a normal biological process, because when you breathe in, heart rate typically speeds up slightly, while during exhalation it slows down. By looking at these cyclical variations in the timing between heartbeats, we can somewhat deduce respiratory rate. Well, sort of. This is far from perfect, but let's take a look at the results. And here we have a similar plot like we just saw for heart rate and heart rate variability, but now for breathing rate, also called the respiratory rate, with the HSleep 5 in red and the reference device in blue-green. And we see sort of a disagreement, though potentially even sort of a mirror image here. The difficulty here is that in the HSleep data export, I only got a single value per hour, and I have no idea how they calculate this. If this is the average minute over that hour, either the hour after, the hour before, or 30 minutes before or after. I did something which sometimes led to somewhat close results, but I just have no way of knowing how exactly this is calculated by the HSleep pod, and especially what time range they use. So both the fact that the reference isn't very good at this, and that I have no idea how they calculate this because the resolution is so low in the data export, I'm not really sure what to do with this. If we look at this second night, maybe the agreement is a bit better, so the overall patterns somewhat match. However, for this night again, I wouldn't say that the patterns match very well. Here maybe a tiny bit, but the values are just more extreme according to the HSleep pod. Then again, here we might even see opposite patterns near the end of the night. And also right here, the match in the beginning might be a bit better than near the end. Based on this though, I cannot really say if the respiratory rate measurements of the HSleep pod are good or not. I did my best, but I don't know exactly how they calculated it, and I don't have a good reference. So I find it difficult to draw any definitive conclusions on breathing rate based on this, because I just don't have a proper reference. I'm not sure if the reference I used here is actually a good reflection of my actual breathing rate. For a future video, I'll try to find a better reference and see how well the HSleep pod performs. Next, I want to talk about energy consumption. How much energy did the HSleep Pod 5 Ultra consume, and how does this correlate with the surface temperature settings of the bed? I could only test this for a few days in early summer, so by no means is this an overview of how it functions for an entire year. It's also local to my environment, and I only used one side of the bed, so if you use both sides you might need to double the power. I do expect the power consumption in summer to be higher than winter, since cooling the bed likely costs more energy per degree in temperature difference. I'm basing this on my limited knowledge on how heat pumps and heating works, and I'm not an expert in this in any regard. And if you want to know more, I recommend checking out Technology Connections videos on this, which are some of the best on the topic. And I'm not even sure if the Pod 5 officially qualifies as a heat pump, but I wanted to shout him out regardless. But let's get to the data. I use an EVE energy sensor to measure the energy consumption, which tracks for each 10 minutes the total watt hours consumed. And here we have the results of the power consumption for the first night. Now the power consumption in watt hours is along the vertical axis on the right, so that's this orange line right here. And then I measured the temperature according to the HSleep pod two-way, so we saw this before, either as exported by the HSleep data, which is this top line right here, or my external temperature sensor, which is slightly below that, but basically shows the exact same patterns. And we see several things going on here. So there's a few peaks in power consumption throughout the night. There's one really early in the night before I go to bed, and then also one as I'm about to wake up. This first one right here is likely to get the bed ready, so to the correct temperature that I set it to, then to maintain it right here, so that's this horizontal line. So it does consume more power here than before, so when it's basically idle. So here's just maintaining the temperature. And then when I actually enter the bed, probably also my body temperature influences the actual temperature of the bed. Then throughout the night, there's a few moments where it needs to cool down the bed. So for instance, right here, it consumes a lot of power, and probably here it needs to keep cooling the bed. Then at some point it lets go of that, so it allows the bed temperature to rise, which is probably also influenced by my body ejecting a lot of heat. And then later in the night, there's also this big peak in power consumption, and that is because I use the thermal alarm as well. So it actually heats the bed up as a way of waking me up more gently. So there's a big power consumption right here. But probably here in the middle of the night, more power is consumed for cooling. And here in the beginning of the night, depending on the environmental temperature, it's either heating or cooling as well. And near the end of the night, it's heating the bed. And the total power consumption over the entire night was about 0.3 kilowatt hours, so 312 watt hours. And if we assume the average electricity rate in the US is 16.44 cents, I had to look that up, The total cost for this night of cooling and heating is about 5 cents, so not a lot, but if you add it up over the whole year, of course you do pay a few dollars for the 8-sleep pod. But let's now look at a few more nights to see if we have similar patterns. So this is the next night. This first peak is probably again to get the bed ready for me, so to the correct temperature, and then maintain it. And then probably around here I got into the bed. And then later on when it needs to start cooling, so we see a drop in temperature both according to the logging of the 8-sleep pod and my temperature logger. It first has to consume a big amount of power to start that cooling, then it keeps consuming it to keep it in a low temperature. And then probably around here it stops cooling. And then again the thermal alarm goes off and you can see a big spike in temperature that really nicely coincides with the energy consumption. And basically we have the same patterns for all nights. Getting the bed ready, then cooling the bed and keeping it at a cooler temperature, then stopping the cooling, so that's this period right here, where the temperature will slowly increase, probably also due to my body heat. Then near the end here, the thermal alarm goes off, and the consumption is always somewhere between 300 and 350 watt hours, so about 0.3 kilowatt hours. So the cost is always about 5 US cents, so that's not a lot, and over the entire year it might add up to about $15–20. But I just find it fascinating, and of course it just makes total sense how power consumption nicely aligns with the temperature shifts. That's of course what the Pod 5 is designed to do. I just find it interesting how clearly we can see those changes. Let's look at one final night, and I think this night right here is quite a nice example. So we have that initial peak getting the bed ready, and this peak right here cooling down the bed, so you can really see that drop in temperature right here the moment it starts cooling. And this was one night where it actually better positioned the sensors on the bed, so before they were just slightly away from the actual cooling surface, so it doesn't cover the actual edges of the bed, the cooling surface, it's slightly more towards the middle of the bed. And with my infrared camera I could actually see where that surface was and place the sensors right on the beginning of that surface where I had it placed, so it wouldn't be influenced by the temperature of my feet, but I would still get an accurate temperature measurement. And you can nicely see that quick drop in temperature the moment it starts cooling, and then it really has to maintain it. So here, for instance, it rose again a bit, probably due to my core body temperature. Then it needs to maintain it, so it cooled it down a bit again, so there was an increased power consumption. Probably my body generating heat again increased the temperature of the bed right here. Then there was more power consumption here, and it again cooled down the bed. And then right here, where there's also some slight increase in power consumption, it probably even actively started heating the bed, so raising the temperature as I'm getting closer to waking up. And then here the thermal alarm went off and you can see that nice spike in temperature. I just love data, and I think it's just cool to see how some systems like this work. So the energy consumption by the Pod 5 Ultra appears to be relatively low if we assume that throughout the year power consumption is identical, which I don't think is a completely valid assumption, but the best I can do. The total cost would be about $20 for the active cooling and heating at night for one side of the bed, which isn't bad. If we add the idle time power consumption of the bed during the day and the energy consumption of the adjustable base, we'd probably need to add about $8 based on my measurements, which would make the total close to $30. And if we cooled and heated each side of the bed, that would be $50 total, or about 13 cents per day, assuming we can just double that number for two sides of the bed. Now, of course, power consumption costs money, but if it actually replaces your air conditioner, or if you just set your aircon a few degrees higher because of the pod, that probably would save you quite a bit of money in the long run. Now we have two more features to test. First, the snoring measurements, and second, the soundscapes and meditation function. And let's start with the snoring test. The Pod 5 Ultra, like the Pod 4 Ultra, can detect snoring based on vibration sensors in the bed and will slightly raise the head of the bed to reduce the snoring. I actually discussed this in some detail in my video on the Pod 4 Ultra and explained that sleeping at a slightly raised angle is actually used as a therapeutic intervention for snoring and can reduce some symptoms of sleep apnea. Of course, please consult your doctor if you have any medical issues. I'm not giving medical advice in this video. The Pod 5 Ultra and the Pod 4 Ultra, for that matter, have the benefit that you don't need to sleep at an increased angle the entire night, but your head will only temporarily be raised and then come back down after you stop snoring. Be aware though that both sides of the bed will slowly rise simultaneously, so also on your partner's side. 8sleep does try to optimize that process of raising the bed so that neither of you wakes up from this, but be aware of that limitation. Fortunately, I'm not a big snorer, which is unfortunate for this video actually. Luckily, I know some people, specifically my friend and colleague Francesco, who doesn't only have a PhD in biology, but basically is an expert at snoring. So I invited him to sleep at my place for one night. I had to disappoint him though that we wouldn't be sleeping in the same bed together, because for a wedding once I had to sleep in the same hotel room as him, and that taught me to never want that again. Franchi is one of the most notorious snorers I know, and his girlfriend sometimes has to sleep in a different room when it's really bad. At the time when I'm recording this, he wasn't actually sure if he could make it this week, so depending on how that went, future Rob will either go through the results for Franchi's night of sleep or just share my personal experience. So let's give the floor to future Rob.
No, the camera was just there for the thumbnail, but I thought it would be funny to keep it there. This is the 8 Sleep Pod 5 Ultra before you tried the Pod 4 Ultra. So this is the thing that actually cools and heats the bed. So this side of the bed right here is heating and cooling, so you should sleep on this side. And now also the actual blanket is heating and cooling, so the water also goes through the blanket.
So it's a water bed.
Well, a little bit, but not really. So the idea is that if you snore, detects it, it goes up. I set it to heavy snorer, so it's ready for you. But if you're not heavy snorer anymore, that would be disappointing.
That's it.
But we will find out. Good morning. I think Franchi's in the shower right now, but we have success. Look at this. Let's ask him in a moment if he actually noticed. You woke up because of the bed moving.
Yeah.
So it did work.
I don't know. Is it?
No, it's not supposed to wake you up. So for you, it detected it, but it did it a bit too extreme.
I don't know.
But you're also
I realized, but I don't know. Maybe the other.
You're also an extremely light sleeper, or no?
No.
No?
Well, I have no idea.
Coffee?
Yeah. I think you should also do a massage. So you should have a function in which it could do like massage because it can move. I think it's relatively easy to add.
Okay, but your overall judgment on a scale of 1 to 10, how comfortable, like all the functionalities of the bed?
7:30.
So 7.5 or what?
Yeah.
And what is your main complaint of the night?
Cold. Like it was too cold in this bed.
Yeah, that's my fault.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for the testing. I hope you enjoy your coffee.
Danke for the invitation.
You're welcome, and thank you for making these beautiful drawings for me. Okay, I had a look at some of the data. Franchi's actually back off to work. I also need to get to work, but I quickly wanted to discuss what I found. So first of all, Franchi snored quite a bit more than I do on average. So as you can see right here, he was quite heavily snoring for large parts of the night. And if I look at the infrared footage camera, I can see that indeed the bed went up a few times, trying to make him snore less. So in general, it did seem to be able to detect at least some of his snoring and also intervene. As to the effectiveness of that intervention, that's a bit hard for me to say. On the infrared camera, I noticed that Franchi quite often sleeps on his side, and in those cases I wonder if that elevation actually makes a huge difference, or if it's only very effective if somebody's sleeping on their back. Of course, some of the time he was still sleeping on his back, so then it could have had some effect. And I also expect that depending on the underlying cause of the snoring, this elevation of the bed will work or not work as well. So overall, what can we conclude? Well, it does seem that the bed was able to detect the snoring. It initiated the intervention. It's just hard to say how effective this intervention was. Ideally, I would do a much larger test where Franchi would sleep here for maybe 20 nights, where for 10 nights the sleep intervention would be turned on, for 10 nights it wouldn't, and we would judge both the sleep quality that he had and the amount of snoring and see if the sleep quality is better and the snoring is less those nights when the intervention was turned on. Unfortunately, I cannot do this. I can also not ask Franchi to sleep here that much. He was already so kind to sleep here for one night and take time out of his day, or his night actually, to come here and help me with this. So again, thank you Franchi, and back to pass Rob.
One thing that isn't ideal about the 8 Sleep Pod 5 is its price. But before discussing the price of the Pod 5 and if you should upgrade from the Pod 4, let's talk about the audio features of the Pod 5 Ultra. With the Pod 5 Ultra's new built-in audio system in the adjustable base, you have several features that were intended to help enhance your rest and relaxation. First, you can listen to calming soundscapes like gentle rain, ocean waves, or pink noise, helping drown out distractions and ease you into sleep. At least that's what it's designed to do. It also includes guided relaxation sessions such as non-sleep deep rest protocols by Dr. Andrew Huberman, designed specifically to promote recovery and relaxation even when you're not sleeping. Plus, you can set these sounds or calming music to play automatically at your scheduled bedtime, or even use them to gently wake up as part of your alarm. All these audio features are controlled directly through the app, or some of them also via the physical buttons on the mattress itself. Now, I don't really have any data on how well this works to help you fall asleep, since it's difficult to test, but the app in general works well and I didn't have any issues. Be aware though that you cannot use it as a Bluetooth speaker, so you can only play the sounds in the 8 Sleep app. Now the audio works well and the quality is okay. It's nothing to write home about, but it serves its purpose. Just to give you an impression, I'll share a few short clips of the soundscapes and meditations. So let's listen to a few examples of different soundscapes and different meditations or non-sleep deep rest protocols by Andrew Huberman. And I'm actually gonna put the bed up for a second because that's a bit more comfortable. But let's get started at the same time. So here I have the app. So there are different soundscapes and a few protocols by Andrew Huberman. So let's start with some soundscape. So we have some different noise frequencies. So pink noise, brown noise, white noise, and then calm river, beach life, mountain rain, and a few more. I actually like brown noise, so let's get started. So this right here is brown noise. I don't know if the noise cancellation actually cancels that out somewhat. So a lot of microphones nowadays have something integrated, but let's turn up the volume a bit. So it gets to be quite loud. So my microphone is about arm's distance away. So it really can get quite loud, but I prefer it to be slightly less loud. Or maybe some rain and thunder. So these are the sort of soundscapes you can get. There's a few more. I won't go through all of them, but summer night, for instance, is quite nice. So here, this is the last one. This is summer night. I would, of course, turn it down a little bit if I were actually to use it for sleep. At the moment, at least in the version of the app that I have, there's just 2 versions of non-sleep deep rest protocols. But let's start with the first one.
Non-sleep deep rest allows you to consciously shift your brain state from thinking, stressing, planning, from anticipation of any kind, positive or negative, to one of pure sensation and deep relaxation, simply by shifting your perception. Inhale deeply through your nose, and then exhale completely through your mouth. And as you exhale your air through thinly pursed lips, as if blowing through a small straw.
Did I personally need another speaker in my bedroom? Well, honestly, not really. For me, it's sort of a nice to have, but not essential at all. It's good that it's fully integrated into the HSleep ecosystem, so you can set it to autoplay and start at the same time the temperature of the bed is ready for you. I would be curious to know how many people would actually use this feature if you had it. Let me know in the comments below. Now let's quickly talk about pricing, which is sort of the elephant in the room, I suspect. How does the new Pod 5 stack up price-wise compared to the previous Pod 4 models? Well, as we're used to, HSleep products are not cheap, they are just very expensive. I'll display all prices on screen in a moment. I just want to say that I know that the HSleep pod is not affordable for everyone. If you live maybe in California or New York and you have a decent salary, your salary could be orders of magnitude higher than in some other parts of the world. A Pod 5 base model might be the equivalent of less than a month's rent in New York, but several months rent somewhere else. I'm just sharing the prices as they are, and you should decide for yourself if it's worth it for you, and only get it if you can really afford it. Now here you can see the prices on screen right now. Just as a reminder, the base Pod 5 has the mattress cover only, the Pod 5 Plus also has the temperature regulated blanket, and the Pod 5 Ultra also adds an adjustable base on top of that. In the US, because of the tariffs affecting prices, the standard Pod 5 ended up costing around $400 more than its Pod 4 counterpart, starting at $2,849 for a full size compared to $2,449 for the Pod 4 full size. Prices for the Pod 5 Ultra in the US range from somewhere around $6,100 for a queen, going up to $6,300 for a king or Cali king, which is really a lot of money. In Europe, tariffs are luckily not an issue, and the regular baseline Pod 5 price has stayed the same or even become slightly cheaper than the Pod 4 was, starting at $3,049 for the double size, identical to the Pod 4, but notably less expensive at larger sizes, like $3,249 instead of $3,349 for a Super King. However, if you choose the Pod 5 Ultra, which adds both the temperature-controlled blanket and the upgraded adjustable base, built-in speakers and tap-to-control buttons, the prices start at €6,599 for the large double size and go to €6,699 for the Emperor, making it about €1,800 more expensive than the equivalent Pod 4 Ultra, which ranged somewhere between €4,800 and €5,000. However, as a reminder, the Pod 4 Ultra did not have a cooling blanket. So to summarize it simply, here in the EU, the base model of the Pod 5 is roughly the same price or a bit cheaper as the Pod 4, while in the US it's slightly pricier due to tariffs. Choosing the higher end Pod 5 Ultra with all the bells and whistles, including the temperature controlled blanket, base and built-in speakers, comes at a significant premium in both markets compared to the previous generation. But of course you do get that new blanket with 360-degree temperature control. So for who do I actually recommend the Pod 5 and the Pod 5 Ultra, and should you upgrade if you have the Pod 4? I'd say that if you have the money available and you struggle with regulating your body temperature at night, either because you're always too hot or too cold, or you just want an extra way of optimizing your sleep, then both the Pod 4 and the Pod 5 are excellent choices. It's also great if you're looking for accurate sleep tracking, so sleep stages, heart rate variability, without having to wear anything at all on your body, or if you simply want extra cooling power in the hot summer months. Honestly, the H-Sleep Pod has been my personal favorite sleep improvement device for years now, and the Pod 5 series only builds further on that. However, it is really expensive, so I only recommend it if you really have the budget available. And again, if you want the best discount possible and also want to support the channel, you can use my discount link below in the description in combination with the code TQS. But another question is, should you upgrade your existing Pod 4 to the new Pod 5? I would say if you're already happy with your current Pod 4, you're probably not gonna need to upgrade, unless you're specifically looking for increased cooling performance with that added pod blanket. The base models of the Pod 4 and Pod 5 are mostly exactly the same in terms of cooling, heating, sensor technology and algorithms, and aside from those side buttons that you have now instead of the tap version, the base versions are basically identical. Especially in the US market where prices have increased quite a bit due to tariffs, anyone who already has a Pod 4 might find that sticking with their current pod is the smartest move since you came out quite a bit cheaper. However, if you still feel you need extra cooling on top of what you already have with your Pod 4, the Pod 5 Plus does add a significant amount of cooling power due to that added blanket. So it really depends on your personal situation. Oh, and I should mention, one thing I'm not a fan of, but which does seem to be an industry standard, is that you need to pay a monthly subscription fee to use your H-Sleep Pod. This is for software upgrades and all those kinds of things. It's similar to what, for instance, the Oura Ring and the Whoop Strap do. Now, the exact amount will vary depending on your region, so please look that up before buying the pod. I'm not a fan of this, but it does seem to be where the industry is going. I hope this will reverse a bit over time, at least for some things, but it is just what it is, and be aware before you buy. Now, if you want to get sneak previews on results, consider becoming a YouTube member, and if you do decide to get the H-Sleep Pod 5, Ultra Plus or whatever version, a Whoop Strap, an Oura Ring, another device, or anything at all on Amazon for that matter, even something as small as toilet paper, you want to support the channel and save a lot of money at the same time, there are different affiliate links in the description below. Now, given that you watched this whole video on the H-Sleep Pod, I think you will like this video on the best sleep stage trackers and this video on the new Whoop Strap 5.0.